Hello, welcome back. This is part 2 of Chapter 6 on criminal law. This focuses on the topic of where crime and business intersect. Let's go back and look at white-collar crimes. Embezzlement, again, is the removal of funds for personal use from your employer or from a government employer. The fact that money is returned is not a defense to the crime. Once you've committed this crime, returning the money may be part of what's called restitution, but you would still be charged with the crime itself. The Mail Fraud Act of 1990 was passed because of a bunch of phony charities that were soliciting money both over the phone and through direct mail. My advice, never give money over the phone. No matter how appealing the cause, simply just tell them to send you a notice, and at least then you have some kind of record. I also would avoid charities that you're just not familiar with. Bribery itself, I think I pointed this out in part 1, an offer alone, just an offer, is a crime. No acceptance is required. That's a separate crime if a federal or governmental official accepts a bribe. Bankruptcy fraud entails a number of different activities related to filing of bankruptcy by a business or an individual or a couple. Hiding assets when applying under the Federal Bankruptcy Code is a breach of federal law. The penalties for this are quite serious. On the other hand, creditors who are claiming to be owed money when they in fact are not, they are subject to the fraud provisions, anti-fraud provisions under the Bankruptcy Code. In these cases, federal prosecution is done by the United States Attorney General's Office. There is the Economic Espionage Act of 1996, and that makes the stealing, buying, or using trade secrets a crime. This, of course, was done because of a lot of problems that American companies had in dealing with foreign companies that were attempting to steal their products. Any property that's acquired from the proceeds of this crime can be forfeited, and some of you may have noticed in the Wall Street Journal and other financial newspapers there will be legal notices of equipment and assets, cars and jewels and furs and whatever that were purchased with the use of illegal money. The Digital Millennium Copyright Act deals with the huge problem the music industry is having in earning any royalties because of all of the digital theft that goes on as people download and trade and share their recordings. We need to talk a little bit about RICO, the Racketeer Influenced and Corruption Organizations Act. Now, this act was passed to deal with what you and I know as the sort of mafia, the organized crime organizations or families. Mostly their activities were in gambling, prostitution, drug trafficking. I don't know if you're familiar with the expression loan sharks, but loan sharks were people who would loan you money and charge you a couple 100% on it and break your arm if you didn't pay back. What Congress ended up doing was sort of creating quick pay loan type companies that were allowed to, like Cash America and others, where you can borrow money. Pawn shops require collateral. These outfits do not. So they do charge quite high interest rates, but they're regulated so they don't go around beating up their clients. Under this act, any 2 or more individuals can constitute a criminal organization. Unintended consequence of this law is that businesses sometimes find that if they violate any one of 26 areas of federal law, they can be accused of being a criminal organization. This also, the act allows individuals to sue, individuals who've been ripped off or extorted, and they can, if they win their case, they can obtain 3 times their losses plus attorney's fees. And again, remember, normally you pay for your own attorney. But in this case, if you win a case against an organization under RICO in a private lawsuit, your attorney's fees are covered as well. We have, and I mentioned this in part 1, a Stand Your Ground South Carolina law. You want to print this out and read it. There's also a link to more details on this. This allows a person to use deadly force in a vehicle or a business. And perhaps, and we're not sure about other places as well, as long as one feels threatened. But again, this is not a shoot-'em-up cowboy type law, so don't think you can just say, oh, I'm scared and I shot 18 people. No, that's not going to cover it. So take a look at this. Insanity. I mentioned the Susan Smith case, and she knew that she was wrong and admitted that to people after the event, in which she killed 2 of her children by putting them in the back seat of a car, and the car went into a lake and they drowned. She was not able to assert the insanity defense. Other defenses include a mistake. You leave this classroom and you happen to pick up what you think is your binder. Later you discover it belongs to someone else. No, that's not theft, because you didn't have the requisite intent. It was a mistake and you return it, no problem. I mentioned entrapment is a potential defense, but there are 2 elements to it. You have to prove that the law enforcement officials made a suggestion and they were successful in the inducement. Inducement means getting a person to do something they otherwise would never do on their own. That's a very difficult defense to raise. There's another issue about statute of limitations. Let me warn you, South Carolina has none. So, concerning criminal law. You commit a crime under our penal code, and you can be charged with it 40, 50 years later. There's no limit. On the other hand, in collecting debts, you notice that it's basically 3 years. If you don't enforce your debt within 3 years of making the loan, then you're not going to be able to collect. So this puts pressure on banks to foreclose. There's other statute of limitations and other things, and you notice it ranges from 3 to 20 years. What I suggest is you print this out. I'm not going to test you on it. I just want you to see that some of these tort things like false imprisonment, 2 years, legal malpractice, 3 years, and so on. Okay, there's some other issues on page 162. There's a list of constitutional protections. You might want to take a look at that. I am not going to ask you to identify which protection belongs to which amendment. But I do think you ought to know these Fourth Amendment issues, and I've got them here. More important, perhaps, or equally important, do you understand the criminal process protection? First off, to be arrested, a person's got to have a warrant. And to get a warrant, you have to convince a judge there's probable cause. Obviously, if you're in the middle of robbing a bank, yes, you can be arrested without a warrant because you're in the middle of the crime and they're observing it. Grand jury is used for felonies. I explained this in part 1. If under the old days, the king could go and have people arrested and arrested and arrested and keep trying them for really no cause at all other than a rumor. Today, we require that a grand jury be pulled together. A grand jury is a bunch of ordinary citizens, and the solicitor goes before them and says, I have this case involving a felony. I think I can establish probable cause, and they explain it to the jury, and the jury decides based on the witnesses that are called before the grand jury. Sentencing guidelines has been very, very controversial. Now, the media keeps saying that the federal prisons are full of people who happen to smoke one joint. I've tried to do a little research on that. That's not exactly true. Although the people were convicted on a drug charge, they have an arrest record a mile long. And my suspicion is it was easier to prove the case of possession of drugs than it was a murder or arson or some other type of case. So I leave that to you. What we found when the law was passed on sentencing guidelines was that the different jurisdictions, districts, federal districts, the courts were having very, very different results for a similar crime. So that's why the law was passed. But now, with the issues over decriminalization of drugs, I don't know. I don't know how long we'll have this. Finally, the speedy trial. Criminal cases get priority over civil cases. And the goal is to have as speedy a trial as possible so that the witnesses and the evidence doesn't get corrupted. Cybercrime. The book makes a lot of this. Cyber squatting is registering for Coca-Cola, iloveyou.com. You're using a trademarked term, and that's called cyber squatting. It's now against the law to do that. Identity theft, I'm sure you're all familiar with this. There's all sorts of phishing schemes in which you get an email and, oh, a relative of yours has died and just send us your name and address and we'll send you $5 million. And of course they use that information to rip you off and steal your money. Use of copyrighted materials. Boy, this has become a big thing. You will notice that most of the pictures now on websites are copyrighted, or they have what's called a watermark. So when you make a copy of it, it says ePhoto owned by whoever. That is now considered a cyber crime, and it's a breach of federal copyright law. Credit card theft, do I need to say anything about this? Just look at the hacking that went on for Target and other banks. But the real danger of hacking to our economy is stealing our trade secrets. In other words, when you work for a big company, they'll put their designs and future marketing projects and all sorts of trade secrets somehow get into the computer system. And there's a lot of industrial espionage going on. Also, you need to be aware of the CAN-SPAM Act and the U.S. Safe Web Act, which is used against foreign spammers. This was to limit spamming somewhat. And contrary to what the book says, it has reduced spamming. Legitimate companies are very careful to follow the provisions of the CAN-SPAM Act and get permission in one way or another from you. You may not be aware, but when you're asked to do a survey or something, you're agreeing to terms and conditions, and buried in that is permission to be solicited by these direct marketing advertising agencies on behalf of their clients. The other thing is the Counterfeit Access Device and Computer Fraud and Abuse Act of 1984. This was passed pretty early on. It makes it a federal crime to break into a system to obtain data, and that's a felony, and you can get up to 20 years plus fines as well. You served or you wrote about catching a crook. The weakest part of that assignment was your effort to try to identify what could have prevented it, and I just quick comment. If you serve on a board of directors, be sure to play an active role. Make sure they have a separate audit committee with a direct reporting line to internal auditors. Internal auditors should not fear getting fired by a boss that's committing fraud. The other thing is that publicly held corporations, board members need to have a good general counsel to make sure that they understand what stock manipulation is and what the SEC rules are in both insider trading and disclosure and the issue of insider tip-e regulations, because violating those is very serious, and the SEC is a very serious outfit when they do investigations. Also, to be aware of stock options if your organization has them, and the temptation for stock manipulation. If you see an executive or employee that has an overly generous lifestyle, that ought to trigger concern. When you see a so-called investment guru living the high life and flying and jetting in private jets and all that, something's wrong. I just can tell you. Rich people are not as overtly consumptive as you may think, and certainly not those that have to work for a living. So be careful. Finally, I would tell you it's important as an investor to know your economics. I know it's always a challenge to take those courses, but Econ does teach you the financial weather report, and it should teach you, at least a micro, that if something is too good to be true, that should raise suspicion. Never judge an investment by who's in it, but rather by the actual results they get, and make sure that you can really verify that. Well, thank you for watching. I'll be working on a quiz on the text in this PowerPoint, and I think we've covered some of the so whats that will be on the quiz. And I hope you had a good snow break, but we've got to try to stay on schedule, because I've already learned that I may be called to some other appointments on behalf of Lander University, so I don't want us to slip too far behind. So this weekend I'll be posting, probably sometime tomorrow late in the morning, Quiz 6. Thanks for watching.